Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. We begin with breaking news after a Delaware jury found Hunter Biden, President Biden's only living son, guilty on 3 felony counts tied to gun possession while using drugs. It is the first time in American history that a sitting president's child has been convicted of a felony in a criminal trial. Right now, President Biden is on his way to Delaware, where he is likely to see his son. The verdict today followed days of deeply personal testimony detailing Hunter Biden's struggles with addiction. This afternoon, special counsel David Weiss, the Trump-appointed prosecutor who was later tapped by President Biden's attorney general, Merrick Garland, to oversee the case, spoke about the verdict.
This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun, and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct. The prosecution has been and will continue to be committed to this principle.
Hunter Biden did not address reporters when he left court. He later put out a statement saying, quote, "I am more grateful today for the love and support I experienced this last week from my wife, Melissa, my family, my friends, and my community than I am disappointed by the outcome." This afternoon, President Biden did not address the verdict when he delivered remarks on the issue of gun safety. But in a statement, President Biden said, quote, "I am the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today. I also said last week I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support." That statement comes after last week when President Biden vowed in an interview that he would not pardon his son.
Let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
You have.
The verdict also comes amid the 2024 election campaign and just 12 days after the historic criminal conviction of former President Donald Trump. It also comes as Republicans have slammed the DOJ with accusations of a two-tiered system of justice in the wake of the Trump trial. Today, so far, there have been mixed reactions to the verdict from the GOP. Some Republican lawmakers applauded this decision as, quote, accountability. But former President Trump's campaign and some of his allies on Capitol Hill have dismissed the news as a distraction from the Biden family's business dealings. Joining me now from outside the courthouse in Wilmington, it's NBC News' Ryan Nobles. Ali Rafa is at the White House. And also with me, NBC News legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid. So, Ryan, this jury reached this verdict in about 3 hours, which is pretty fast. You also just spoke to one of those jurors. What did they tell you?
Yeah, Yamiche, you did not get a real sense from inside the jury room that there was a lot of debate as to what the outcome of this case was going to be. The juror I spoke to, juror number 10, he's talked to a number of media outlets, said that last night when they got the case, they had a vote. It was 6-6, but he said that 6-6 vote was really about just giving them more time to think about it, and that when the evidence was presented, it seemed pretty clear the direction they needed to go in. Take a listen to a bit of our interview. He asked us to conceal his identity, and we granted that request.
Let me tell you about the 6-6 and my opinion and how I come to conclusion. Okay. Say I was part of that 6. It's not that I didn't think he was guilty. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I wanted to hear, deliberate. I wanted to, hear more about, we saw the evidence. Let's go over the evidence again. Let's make sure we're not convicting somebody just because of who he was or who he is.
Right.
So, and I think that's where the 6 not guilty was. They want to hear the evidence.
Take time to sleep on it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It wasn't a matter of okay, guilty or not guilty. You just said you had to find him not guilty before, in order to, once you do all the evidence before you can find him guilty.
Family, friends, members of the clergy, that is something that even prosecutors
And one of the other things that juror number 10 told me is that it was really not a problem for the jury to separate who Hunter Biden was from what he was accused of. And they said they knew that the First Lady was in the room. They knew there were other high-profile members of the Biden family in the room. They knew he was a president's son, but politics never came into the conversation. They were able to look at the evidence and cast their judgment based on what they were told.
It's very clear that that juror and that this jury took their job very seriously. So walk us through what this verdict means and what it will specifically mean for Hunter Biden.
Well, it's a serious charge. There's no getting around it, Yamiche. This is a federal offense. It's a felony. He's now been convicted on 3 different counts. 2 of those counts carry with it maximum sentences of 10 years in prison. The third carries the weight of 5 years in prison. It's very unlikely that he will serve 25 years in jail. No one expects that to take place. But there is the real possibility now that when sentencing comes around, and that's going to be in the next couple of months, that there will be jail time associated with it. So that puts increased pressure on the upcoming criminal trial that he's facing for tax evasion in September. He would potentially go into that trial as a convicted felon, someone with prior offenses, which would then make that situation a bit more difficult. If he's convicted there, it would impact the sentencing there. So you have to wonder if there's at least some level of discussion amongst his legal team as to whether or not they should try and enter into a new plea agreement. We don't have any reporting that suggests that they're doing that quite yet, but it is an open question here given just how swift and quickly this verdict came down.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about there. And Hunter Biden is not in custody, as we showed pictures of him leaving with the First Lady and his family. What comes next here in terms of sentencing and the appeals process?
So the next stage is that the judge will have to set a sentencing date. She did not provide any kind of indication as to when that would actually take place. But as I said before, that probably happens in the next couple of months. Before the sentencing date is revealed, he is released on his own recognizance, as he has been throughout the course of this hearing. So there was no chance that he was going to be taken into custody or anything along those lines. Meanwhile, his legal team does say that they plan to appeal, and they've been forecasting an appeal from the very beginning. They do believe that this case is on shaky constitutional ground. They believe that the law that's being applied here, one that's rarely used, especially on its own in a court of law, is in violation of the Second Amendment, and they'd like to see the appeals process take that case up. It was something the judge rejected as a grounds for dismissal, but it does open up the possibility that they have something to at least argue at the appellate level. But that's an expensive proposition, right, Yamiche? Hunter Biden is not a wealthy man anymore. He has not really had gainful employment for quite some time as he's come out of his addiction. He's been largely propped up in his legal defense by one benefactor who is a friend of his. There's no guarantee that that money continues. The appellate process would be very, very expensive, and it would be added on to the other defense that he needs to mount in September in that case in California. So there's a lot for Hunter Biden to think about here over the next couple of weeks as to how he is going to handle this new reality that he faces, that he is now a convicted felon. Yamiche.
Certainly a lot to think about. Thank you so much, Ryan Nobles, for all your reporting on this trial and, of course, for today. And Allie, at the White House, I want to turn to you. This is, of course, a sitting president's son guilty of 3 felony counts. History here. The president, we know, will be back in Wilmington tonight. How are he and his family reacting to this verdict, given all the support that they gave Hunter during this trial?
Yeah, Yamiche, the White House announcing just a few hours after this verdict that the president's schedule was changing, that he would head straight to Wilmington to be with his family after appearing at this gun safety event in Washington. And he, at that event, delivered a very fiery, passionate speech that lasted around 20 minutes, but he notably did not react to this verdict. He left the statement that he released earlier today as the only reaction to this verdict from him. Just that statement's just saying that he supports this decision. He accepts the verdict, and he will continue to support Hunter. And we have seen that support, that love from the Biden family really on full display since the beginning of this trial, as we know that this has been extremely difficult for the whole family, as it has really resurfaced a lot of the family's trauma over the last few years. The president not attending this trial in person, but of course we saw remarkably that the First Lady was shuttling between France and Wilmington late last week and even through this past weekend to support her stepson. The emotional toll of that clearly visible on her face throughout this trial. At sometimes we saw her appearing hand in hand with Hunter, wiping away tears while in the courtroom. And throughout this trial, throughout Hunter's struggles with drug addiction, the White House and the president has said that this is a family affair. This is not a political one. But of course, we know how inevitable it is for politics to pour into this. And that's really leading to some concerns among those closest to this family about how this case, as well as the case that you heard Ryan mention in California that Hunter faces for tax evasion charges that'll start in September, how that could potentially impact the president emotionally as really a critical period heats up. The president, in just a few days, will head to Italy for a summit with G7 leaders. He's set to go to several high-profile fundraisers for his campaign. Of course, the first general election debate with former President Trump is later this month, and the election is just 5 months away now. So really, this is a challenge for the president's ability to continue to stay focused and also balance the roles of being president while also being a father to Hunter Biden. Yamiche.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, there was a lot of trauma laid out during this trial that really makes it really clear the challenges that the president and his whole family faces now. So thank you so much, Ali Rafa, for your reporting from the White House. And Barbara, I want to turn to you. What's your reaction to today's verdict, especially as you think about what we heard from the prosecution? Are you at all surprised that the president's son was found guilty on all counts?
I'm not. I think that, only jurors who actually see all the evidence know what all of it, the whole case was like from start to finish. Those of us who are following in the media can't know what it's like to sit in that courtroom. And I think the evidence was rather strong. I think in some ways the star witness in this case was Hunter Biden himself, through his own words in his book, which was a recording of which was played with his own narration, talking about his addiction. And then, of course, his email and text messages back and forth where he was talking about using drugs around the time. There was, I think, a little glimmer of hope for the defense, which was that on the date that he filled out these forms, did Hunter Biden believe that he was an addict or using drugs? And so I think that there was some hope that a jury might find that he did not have the requisite intent on that day. But certainly this is a verdict that a rational trier of fact could reach. And I think it's important that we respect the decision of the jury and respect the rule of law, because this is how our system works. 12 people get together, they listen to the evidence, they are held to that very high standard of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And today they found it after 3 hours, which is fairly quick considering the necessity of reviewing all of the evidence.
It's important that you know how quick this verdict came back. And I wonder, knowing that, do you think it was a bad decision for Hunter Biden's team not to push for another plea deal rather than have this trial? We know that the first plea deal fell apart, but there was a sort of window there where he could have pushed and maybe gotten a second plea deal. What do you make of that?
Yes, it's hard to know what happened behind the scenes. It seems that what was always problematic in these cases was extracting a promise from the special counsel to end it with the gun case and the tax cases and to go no further, to get an assurance that there would be no charges under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, for example, or something else. And it was that failure of the meeting of the minds that really blew up this plea deal. You'll recall that Hunter Biden was willing to admit to this gun offense. He was willing to admit to the tax offenses, but they were going to provide only convictions for misdemeanors and no prison time in exchange. But what happened during that plea hearing was this revelation that there was no meeting of the minds on this other thing. And so it may be that they continued to pursue a plea deal, but the prosecution simply wasn't able to give that assurance. It does seem likely that after this change of circumstances, this conviction today, it would be prudent perhaps for the parties to get back together and explore whether there is room for a plea agreement now. And Yamiche, I also want to mention one other thing that's happened in the interim, and that is the criminal charges against the FBI informant who made those claims about the Biden family. It may be that the special counsel no longer has any interest whatsoever in pursuing Hunter Biden for those other claims. And so that because of that change in situation, they might be more willing to explore a plea deal at this time.
It's very interesting to hear that. I also want to ask you about the sentencing phase of this. What kind of sentence might we expect for Hunter Biden to receive here? And is it likely that he might even face prison time?
Yeah, I ran the sentencing guidelines on the offense for making a false claim when purchasing a firearm. But the challenge there is it applies to all different kinds of prohibited persons. That includes people who have been convicted of domestic violence or been convicted of a felony. And so this one might be a little different because it is charged so infrequently. There's not a whole body of case law for comparisons. And I also think that addiction is likely to be a mitigating factor that a court would consider. But the guidelines in general is 15 to 21 months in prison. Now, that's just a starting point. Courts may go up or down from that range, but it certainly makes prison time a possibility in this case.
Yeah, that would be remarkable, obviously. I also want to ask you, when you think about sort of what could be an appeals process here, what would Hunter Biden's lawyers need to accomplish successfully to appeal this? And what do you expect to be maybe at the center of that appeal?
Yeah, they have the right to appeal. It would come after sentencing, so sentencing will probably be set in about 3 months. The court, in the meantime, will consider Hunter Biden's background, all things about him, and impose what the court believes to be an appropriate sentence. But within 10 days of that sentencing, Hunter Biden would need to file an appeal. It seems to me that the most likely basis for an appeal is an issue they've already discussed. They raised an issue pre-trial under the Second Amendment, and we heard some discussion of that already. Ordinarily, I would say that's a non-starter, but there is a whole lot of controversy these days around a lot of these gun laws following the Supreme Court's decision last year in the Bruin case, where it held that when considering the constitutionality under the Second Amendment of limitations on gun rights, the court should look at the history and tradition of the Second Amendment. There's no real history or tradition of the Second Amendment of prohibiting people from having guns based on substance abuse. And so it could be that under that Bruin precedent, this statute gets invalidated. And so I would imagine that to the extent that this is percolating around the Supreme Court and other courts, that is likely to be an issue that Hunter Biden's lawyers would pursue.
Yeah. Well, a lot on the horizon when we think about the legal landscape ahead. So thank you so much, Barbara McQuaid, for breaking it down for us.
Thank you, Yamiche.
And join me now for what this verdict may mean politically is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. So, Chuck, you're always so great at putting these moments into context. Tell us what you think about the moment that we're living through, where you have now the first child of a sitting president to be convicted of a felony, but also during an election year.
Look, I think this says a lot about the strength of our rule of law to the world. All right. I just think we ought to step back. I still think there's not another country who the son or daughter of a leader of that country would go through a trial while they were a leader of that country. I'm not saying others. We've seen Brazil has put some of their leaders on trial after the fact. But to do that, this makes us unique, and this is who we are, and it's sort of, it is why we're still the beacon. And so I just think we ought to see that for what it is. This is, and look at it. This was the president's home state. This was Delawareans. This was, so it really blows up the conspiracy theory that Donald Trump and Republicans have been putting out there. But I do think not only does it, I think, take the wind out of the sails of trying to mainstream his grievance argument. I do wonder if it also, though, Democrats back off the convicted felon attack themselves, right? How much do they want to? I think if you're talking about these legal issues in your campaign, you're losing. I think if you're talking, especially for the voters that are left, if you're talking about what matters to them, right? These are about Donald Trump personally, Hunter Biden personally, right? These aren't about what matters to the American public. So I wonder if this ends up where both parties stand down on quote unquote lawfare, whatever you want to call this, but in trying to make this, I mean, it certainly created a fundraising boom on the right here. So you see why I think there's going to be some that are going to be not wanting to give that up because they want another hit of financial dopamine. But I think that you're going to see both campaigns, or at least the smart people around them, trying to say, hey, we need to move to talk about what voters want us to hear.
It's interesting that you say that, because some will hear that and say, well, Hunter's not running for president. Donald Trump is a convicted felon running for president, where the President Biden is dealing with the fact that his son is a convicted felon. Do you think that those two things...
Look, I'm not saying that I'm not trying to create equivalencies. I just think it creates... I just think that... Let's think about, this is a human being. Joe Biden doesn't, do you want to put him in the position of this tit for tat?
Yeah.
Think about that debate stage.
Yeah.
Okay. And that tit for tat. I think there's, I'm just saying this more as is that going to be where they want Joe Biden talking about it? It's not whether this is an equivalency or a false equivalency.
Yeah.
I think this is more about what makes the sense for the voters that are left. At the end of the day, I come back to, this is not what gets viewership on a cable channel or gets people fired up about donating money. At the end of the day, you're trying to win an election. Who's the undecided voters? Why are they undecided? What do they want to talk about? I'll tell you what they don't want to talk about: verdicts.
I hear you on that. I've been talking to a number of voters across the country doing this focus group, the deciders, and it's true. They're not really talking about this. But that being said, Republicans have been talking about this, and they've been making the claim that this is a sort of two systems of justice in America, right. And making the claim that Donald Trump has been there's a witch hunt against him. But our colleague, John Allen, he had this Republican strategist tell him this just moments after the guilty verdict. It says at minimum slows the momentum and the clear-cut argument that the Trump campaign previously had about Biden weaponizing the weaponization of the justice system here. Do you think that's likely? Because you already have people like Stephen Miller and others saying, well, yeah, Hunter got convicted, but he didn't get of all of the crimes. And this is really about the Biden crime family, as they're saying.
Well, obviously, logic never works with some of these folks. I mean, that's always
nice way to put it.
I mean, it just, the facts don't matter, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Donald Trump has actually taken advantage of the legal system in ways that most people can't take advantage of. So he has used delays and obfuscation and victimhood and different things essentially to be treated differently than most people would be treated by the system. So if he wants to make that argument, I could sit here and make the argument that he's gotten special treatment. And, look, I look at this moment that we're in with all of these last two trials. We shouldn't have been here.
Yeah.
And there was one person that could have prevented us from being here, and that's the Attorney General. I look back and you think about, why did we have special counsels in the first place? Well, because Merrick Garland waited 18 months to start an investigation on President Trump. We were Donald Trump manipulated the system. He knew that by announcing early, he announces the earliest ever essentially for a mainstream candidate for president, one of the earliest campaign announcements ever for a front runner. I'm not saying that other people have announced earlier than that. But he did it for a specific reason, to force Merrick Garland to name a special counsel, because it then slowed down the investigation. It stalled the investigation into January 6th. And he had to lump all, and then when he did that, once you do one special counsel, he had no choice then to create a special counsel in the Hunter Biden situation, because he's also a candidate for office. So this moment has been a real test of our system, but there were decisions that were made by this Justice Department early on where you ended up leaving a vacuum, allowed local prosecutors to attempt to fill the vacuums themselves, one in Atlanta, one in New York, and then you also had this delay that forced special counsels when there maybe never had needed to be a special counsel in either case.
Well, there are definitely some Democrats who have been angry at Merrick Garland specifically because of the points that you just made. So thank you so much, Chuck Todd, for coming on.
All right, Yamish.
And coming up, much more on the political fallout from Hunter Biden's guilty verdict and the reaction on Capitol Hill from Trump allies. Panel's next. Plus, potential signs of progress in the push to broker an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as Secretary Blinken urges Hamas to accept a deal now. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, reactions from Republicans to Hunter Biden's guilty verdict are coming in. And despite President Biden's son facing a possible prison sentence, his political opponents continue to claim the Justice Department is holding back. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer posted this statement, quote, "Today's verdict is a step toward accountability, but until the Department of Justice investigates everyone involved in the Biden's corrupt influence peddling schemes, it will be clear department officials continue to cover for the big guy, Joe Biden." Likewise, the Trump campaign statement reads, quote, "This trial has been nothing more than a distraction from the real crimes of the Biden crime family." Joining me now is the panel, political White House correspondent and NBC News political contributor Eugene Daniels, former Democratic Congressman from New York, Joe Crowley, and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and NBC News contributor Danielle Pletka. So thank you all for being here. Eugene, Republicans are coming out and they're saying even though that this is a guilty verdict, it's really all part of a big cover-up. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, they have to be able to explain to folks why the justice happened, right? Like, because they've been saying this entire time when it comes to what's going on with the former President Trump, is that the DOJ is covering for Joe Biden. So you have to be able, politically, you have to be able to find a way to sell this to folks. They're like, no, we're not wrong. We're still correct, right? But it's just like a bigger scheme. And that's the great thing about schemes, is that you can always add more to it, right? It doesn't have to end at any time at all. Mm-hmm. But then you also have people like Thomas Massey, you know what I mean, who are saying something different. You have some, so what is coming from, which is interesting, what's coming from Republicans, and you can always tell when they're struggling, is because it's all over the place. Typically, the message is singular, but they're kind of all over the place today with Hunter Biden.
Do you think there will be some overarching political impact after today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question is how does it impact President Biden at this time, right? He's going to the G7 tomorrow. He'll have to debate prep at some point. He'll have his first debate. You have the conventions. He's running out of time to convince people. So how does this weigh on him? We reported weeks ago that he had been telling family members and his senior staff that he was worried and feared for what would happen if his son went to jail, whether or not that would make him want to turn back to drugs, those kinds of things. And that weighs on him. As he said in his statements over and over, he's still a dad.
It's important for you when you make that point, because we're thinking about what are the political impacts, but he's also thinking, like, how is my kid going to deal with this if he emotionally has to go through this? Now, Joe, of course, there's also this trial. There's some that are thinking that's going to make the Biden campaign's argument against Donald Trump, calling him a convicted felon, making the case to voters that our justice system got this right when it came to Donald Trump, that it's going to muddy the waters here, maybe even turn into whataboutism. What do you think of that?
Well, I think you have two candidates, one that was convicted of a felony, one that wasn't.
Yes.
And I think what I see lacking in terms of response, at least short term, from Republicans on the Hill, is how much the Hill has changed. Yeah. Joe Biden was a person of the Hill. Democrats, Republicans respected him. And a lack of empathy. Well, at least they have relationships.
For a while there.
I don't mean as president, but when he was a senator, he had relationships. But the lack of empathy, I'm a father of 3 young adults. I know how difficult it is to raise children. I think many Americans understand that as well. And compassion for a dad whose son has just been convicted. The impact on a family is enormous, life-changing. And I think that's where I think right now, the first blush, they should be more compassionate, I think, towards the family.
Yeah. Danielle?
Yeah, that doesn't play that well for me. I mean, no, to the contrary. It's not because of that. Actually, look, this sucks for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. I don't care who you are. If your child is a drug addict, is frankly kind of a scumbag, and has tried to straighten himself out, and he's in this trouble, it's awful. On the other hand, we don't push people into politics. This isn't the Assad family. They don't have to serve to oppress their own people. You choose that job, and what comes with it, unfortunately, is this. Now, in terms of what people think, people may be struggling for a message. I mean, that's what Washington is all about. The challenge, I think, is that the public perception of all of these things is that Washington is irretrievably broken. That the government is in this, but this goes for the Trump trial as well, that the government is in the service of a political agenda. And so on the left, people are looking at it like, Donald Trump. And on the right, people are looking at it like, call it the Biden crime family. That's a little large for my taste. But, look at Hunter. Look at the sweetheart deal he got secretly offered. No matter what, this does more to erode our confidence, our faith in our institutions, and that is truly terrible. But
what helps restore it, though, is that 2 juries of 12 people, 24 men and women, came to a decision on both this case and the Trump case. And you have to respect that. No matter whether you think it should have been brought or not, you have to respect that actually took place and respect that.
Yes, and no. Again, would either of them have been in the dock if their name wasn't Trump or Biden?
I'm putting all that aside, putting all those issues aside, the fact that 12 men and women in both cases came to unanimous agreement on these charges, I think it speaks well for the system itself. Whether you like it or not, whether they should have been charged or not, the facts that were presented to those juries they came back unanimously, and I think that's really impressive.
I want to play some sound of House Speaker Johnson and take a listen to what he said.
You've been saying two-tier system of justice for some time. Here's the president's son being convicted on 3 counts. Doesn't that undercut your claims?
It doesn't. Every case is different, and clearly the evidence was overwhelming here. I don't think that's the case in the Trump trials, and all the charges that have been brought against him have been obviously brought for political purposes. Hunter Biden is a separate instance.
Eugene, do you think that this argument of a two-tier justice system is going to be something that Republicans are just going to keep saying over and over again, even after all this?
Yes, absolutely. I don't
do you think it will be successful?
It depends on with whom, right? So I think that the voters that are going to be impacted by this, or even the Trump conviction, are few and far between. So many people have already made up their minds about these 2 men who are running for president that I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It matters for so many reasons, right? For those of us that care about like our government and democracy and all those things and making sure this thing works. Yeah. But at the end of the day, there's so few people in so few states that haven't made up their mind and that can be swayed by this, that it was always almost null and void and baked into the cake. And the people that they're speaking to when they say two-tier justice system, they're talking to Republicans. They're not talking to Democrats, because Democrats would agree that there has been a two-tier justice system, but they would say that they're talking about black and brown people who have been treated unfairly by the justice system for decades, right? And so you have kind of the same argument for very, very vastly different.
I also want to turn really quickly, though, to what's going on at the DOJ, because there's a whole other aspect of today that is also something we need to point out, which is Attorney General Merrick Garland. He wrote this: in the recent weeks, we've seen an escalation of attacks that go far beyond public scrutiny, criticism, and legitimate necessary oversight of our work. They are baseless, personal, and dangerous. He said they come in the form of conspiracy theories crafted and spread for the purpose of undermining public trust in the judicial process itself. We will not be intimidated by these attacks. How remarkable is that when you think about what we've been talking about so far, that Merrick Garland has often been quiet, that he's in the Washington Post writing this?
Well, it also goes back to the speaker's comments. It's the same thing. They actually came up with this idea of indicting the president's son because it would make Trump's trial look more legitimate. I mean, how ridiculous. That's basically what he was just saying. It has no point in fact. The president is behind President Trump's indictment and his conviction. That's what they've all been saying. Let's indict my son and have him go to jail, possibly go to jail. That'll make it all look really hunky-dory. It's nonsense. And also look at the difference in the way in which the Trump folks attacked that judge. President Biden didn't attack this judge. No one attacked any member of the jury or questioned them or where they were coming from. So I do think you have to look at that, from my point of view, admirably in terms of how they handled this.
And Danny, this comes as an op-ed. This op-ed comes as there was a letter that the DOJ sent to Jim Jordan telling him that they found no communication between New York's DA's office and the DOJ, despite his insistence. I wonder what you make of that in context of what we've been talking about.
Some of us are old enough to remember the movie Casablanca and the famous scene in which they walk into Rick's gambling joint and they say they are shocked to see gambling going on here. This is what Merrick Garland's piece in the Post smacks of to me. He is shocked to find out that there is politicking going on and conspiracy theorizing going on in Washington. I mean, I don't know if anybody remembers the Kennedy assassination. Conspiracy theorizing and the role of the government and the DOJ, in particular the FBI, that has just been an object of all of this for many years. And the reality is that DOJ and other agencies of government, the IRS in particular, have been willing tools of partisan administrations, Republican and Democrat. They lend themselves to this.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about a lot more on this busy day, but I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to Eugene, Danny, Joe. I appreciate you all coming on. And up next, new developments in the Middle East. Hamas now says it has officially responded to the latest proposed ceasefire deal. This as Secretary of State Antony Blinken wraps up a second day of meetings with top Arab leaders. We're live in Jerusalem with the latest next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the Middle East, where we're tracking potential movement on the ceasefire agreement President Biden outlined last month. Hamas says it has now submitted its official response to the deal to Qatari and Egyptian mediators. In a joint statement, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad said they were ready to reach a deal. The White House confirms it's also received the response from Hamas. Earlier today in Tel Aviv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Israel is committed to the deal. Take a listen.
I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu last night, and he reaffirmed his commitment to the proposal. We await the answer from Hamas, and that will speak volumes about what they want, what they're looking for, who they're looking after. Are they looking after one guy who may be, for now, safe, buried, I don't know, 10 stories underground somewhere in Gaza, while the people that he purports to represent continue to suffer in a crossfire of his own making? Or will he do what's necessary to actually move this to a better place, to help end the suffering of people, to help bring real security to Israelis and Palestinians alike?
But questions remain about whether all sides are in agreement, and it's still unclear what exactly the proposal entails. An Israeli government official told NBC News that under the current proposal, Israel will be allowed to pursue its objectives in Gaza, including destroying Hamas military and government capabilities. Joining me now is NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley in Jerusalem. So, Matt, where does this deal go from here, and how much pressure is Hamas facing in this moment to accept this deal?
Well, a lot of pressure, Yamisha. You know, this is a situation where we're talking about Hamas as a whole, of course, but there's different parts of Hamas. There's the Hamas that's hiding underground, we think underground, in the Gaza Strip. There's the Hamas that's in Doha conducting these negotiations. There's the Hamas that's in Beirut. And we're kind of, I got to tell you, starting to hear some different things, it sounds like, from different leaders. The Economist just came out with an article saying that they heard from a Hamas leader that they had accepted the treaty and that they were just waiting to hear approval from Yahya Sinwar, who's the leader of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. We heard from ourselves that it sounds like from Israeli authorities, NBC News heard that people who are close to the conversation, that Hamas had accepted it but was making some changes to the timeline. And then we've heard from others that Hamas has rejected this proposal. So while the entire world is waiting on Hamas to give their response, we're getting some conflicting different views, some different ideas. We're also waiting, by the way, on Israel. Now, we've been seeing this over and over again. The Biden administration, Biden himself, has presented Israel's plan as the plan. We haven't heard that much from Israel themselves. We've heard a lot from Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. We've heard a lot from Joe Biden talking about this plan and how on board Israel was. They even put that in the UN resolution that was passed almost unanimously yesterday in the UN Security Council, taking it for granted that Israel had already signed on to the deal. But we still don't really know, because 2 or 3 weeks ago, we heard from Joe Biden when he presented this as Israel's plan. And Benjamin Netanyahu and his allies spent much of the following week walking that back. So we still have a lot to hear from both parties. Yamish?
Still a lot to hear from both parties. And Secretary Blinken also met with Israeli opposition leader Benny Gantz today, just days after he resigned from the war cabinet. What do we know about that meeting, and how is it being received by Netanyahu's coalition?
Well, this is a meeting, that it's probably not going to be, all that welcomed by Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition. We don't know exactly, as we always get from these readouts, we don't know exactly what was said. But this is, Antony Blinken putting himself in front of a man who, for the past several months, really for the past several years, has been considered the, quote, adult in the room when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu and his far right cabinet. In fact, the furthest right cabinet in Israeli history. That's what we've been hearing. So this is, a conversation with Washington and a man who had been Washington's man in the room. And now it looks like he's not there. And Benjamin Netanyahu is left only facing his right-wing allies who want war, and more war. So, when it comes to Benny Gantz, he's no longer part of the conversation in a way that he once was. So I'd imagine that this was, probably Antony Blinken trying to get Gantz to take what little traction he still has on what the government can do in Gaza and use it. But we don't know exactly what was said.
Matt Badley, there's a lot of stops and starts here and a lot of players, so thank you so much for breaking it all down. And up next, power, politics, and primaries. We're breaking down what to watch for in today's Republican primary context as Donald Trump's endorsement power gets put to the test in a number of key races. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we say around here, if it's Tuesday, voters are voting somewhere. And today, that somewhere is Maine, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina. We've got our eyes on some Republican primaries that will once again test the power of Donald Trump's endorsement. In South Carolina, the former president has endorsed Congresswoman Nancy Mace. She's facing a primary challenger backed by former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Mace was one of 8 Republicans who voted to oust McCarthy last fall. She's become a loyal Trump supporter despite fiercely condemning him following the January 6th insurrection. Also in South Carolina, Trump is backing Congressman William Timmons. He's facing a Tea Party-backed challenger in the 4th District. In Nevada, the establishment-backed Republican candidate for Senate, Sam Brown, picked up a late endorsement from Donald Trump. And in North Dakota, Trump is backing Congressman Kelly Armstrong's bid for governor. The current governor and a vice presidential hopeful, Doug Burgum, is backing his lieutenant, Tammy Miller. Now, that, of course, puts him at odds with former President Donald Trump. Joining me now to break this all down is today's primary contest is NBC News' senior political editor, Mark Murray. So, Mark, there's a lot here. Let's look at the South Carolina Republican primary. Nancy Mace and William Timmons, as we said, they're both facing well-funded challengers here. What's your outlook for that contest?
We're going to see if there's an incumbent that actually goes down to defeat. And Yamish, there hasn't been one incumbent that is lost when you take away the redistricting member-on-member races that have actually already occurred. And it's worth noting on Nancy Mace that she ended up being opposed by Donald Trump in the 2022 midterms, was able to withstand that, win her race. And this time she actually has Donald Trump's backing. And the group that actually is opposed to her, it's Kevin McCarthy and his allies that are angry for her vote to oust him from the speakership. So some kind of like upside down world. And Nancy Mace once was opposed by Donald Trump, now has his support and is hoping that pulls her across the finish line. It's worth noting there is a runoff. If you don't get more than 50%, we're going to be seeing if she's able to clear that because there's a 3-person race there.
It's very interesting to see Nancy Mace be able to get that endorsement and it all be sort of part of Kevin McCarthy's possible revenge tour there. But I also want to ask you about Nevada. There's Sam Brown and Jeffrey Gunter are both Trump supporters. Trump backed the frontrunner Brown just before Election Day. This is sort of a late endorsement there. Is it the case that Trump is really just kind of getting on board because he thinks that that's the candidate likely to win here?
Well, as we know, sometimes he does end up having these endorsements because he likes that winning record or at least have that record that he's able to shout during his rallies. But Yamish, it's worth noting that the National Republican Senatorial Committee had backed Sam Brown a long time ago. And one thing that's kind of been interesting is that Donald Trump has actually made some pragmatic and strategic moves with the NRSC. And so, yes, he ended up having a very late endorsement, but he kind of came around to where the establishment Republicans in the NRC wanted him to be. It is also something he did in the Montana Senate race, too, backing Tim Sheehy in that race over Matt Rosendale. And so some kind of pragmatism coming from the former president, Donald Trump, on those endorsements.
And, of course, there's also, we got to ask you about North Dakota. There's, of course, some tension there. Talk about that.
So, yes, you end up having Donald Trump, who's backing Kelly Armstrong, the Republican member of Congress representing North Dakota, and Doug Burgum, who a lot of people have on Donald Trump's potential short list to be his running mate, is backing Tammy Miller, who's Burgum's lieutenant governor. Burgum is not running for re-election, and so this has kind of created a situation where every Republican who's ever had designs on being governor, this is your shot to be able to do so. Trump has his candidate, Burgum has his own candidate, and we'll see who ends up winning.
It's also interesting that these candidates are sort of all a different flavor of Trump. Where gone are the days where you have this establishment person who's maybe backed by Mike Pence, and then you have someone who's maybe backed by Donald Trump. What does that tell you about the state of things?
Great question, Yamish. Look, this is Donald Trump's party, and you're exactly right. This doesn't have anything to do with the ideology or establishment versus Trump. This is all Donald Trump's party right now. And what is worth noting, Yamish, in the 2022 midterms, us following Donald Trump's endorsed candidate and his track record was one of the bigger stories because we were all trying to gauge, is the Republican Party still Donald Trump's party? Well, we got our answer to that with him winning the Republican nomination in 2024. These endorsements are less important. The fact that the results that we saw in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and the Super Tuesday states where Republican primary voters said, no, we are Donald Trump's party. And again, again. So that's why I think that these endorsements is not as consequential as the early primary votes that we saw from Republican primary voters.
Yeah, a fascinating change to have people sort of out Trump in this way. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Still to come, Rudy Giuliani's Arizona mugshot is released. I'll talk to our NBC News Phoenix reporter who caught up with the former Trump attorney moments after he was processed and posted bond in the Arizona fake electors case. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We're hearing from Rudy Giuliani for the first time since posting bond in his Arizona fake electors case. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office released this mugshot of the former New York City mayor last evening, shortly after he posted bond. As he left the courthouse, Giuliani spoke exclusively to Brahm Resnik from our Phoenix affiliate, KPNX NBC 12 News, about the case.
Do you have any regrets about what you did in Arizona after the election?
Oh, my goodness, no.
Why not?
I'm very, very proud of it.
Proud of it? Proud of trying to overturn the vote? That's your words.
Oh, but are you on one side? Just one side? That's a hell of a way to ask.
Well, that's the allegation against you, isn't it, sir? That's what the indictment says.
No, but I'm presumed innocent, aren't I?
You are.
Well, you don't seem to be presuming me innocent. You seem to me to have a prejudiced viewpoint.
Yeah.
You seem to have a prejudiced viewpoint.
Well,
I mean, that's a heck of a prejudiced viewpoint for.
Well, okay, you said
an American.
Your answer was heck no. Why not?
Because there was a substantial amount of vote fraud that went on here. That was covered up. Probably one of the biggest conspiracies in American history. And I think that's coming out over and over again. They just discovered 275,000 missing ballots in Georgia. I think you're going to find that just like Russian collusion was a hoax, this election was a hoax.
And Brahm Resnik joins me now. Of course, we should note that there is no evidence that there was any sort of false issues with the election in 2020. It was free and fair. That being said, Brahm, you got this great interview. Congratulations for that exclusive reporting. What is Rudy Giuliani accused of doing here? Break it down for us. And what did he tell you? What more did he tell you about the charges against him?
Well, he's accused with 17 other people of being part of conspiracy to overturn Joe Biden's victory and deprive voters of their vote, disenfranchise them, with this fake electors scheme, putting together a slate of 11 Trump electors and sending them to Washington, D.C. as the duly elected Arizona electors, which they weren't. Joe Biden won the state. Arizona is now one of 5 states that have filed criminal charges in this case. Rudy Giuliani says there's plenty of evidence of malfeasance here. In fact, it was Rudy Giuliani himself who said after the election, we have to Rusty Bowers, House Speaker Rusty Bowers, according to Bowers' testimony, that, quote, we have plenty of theories, we just don't have evidence. And over the last 3.5 years, there has been no evidence in court. In fact, we have seen more evidence of Rudy Giuliani's efforts to overturn the election in many, many ways through, we see them in emails, text messages, voicemails, Rudy Giuliani's words himself, all these efforts to overturn Arizona's election in 2020 in several different ways. Now, I did get to ask him what he thought would happen in this case. Here's how he responded. Where's the evidence, sir? Where's the evidence that the election was stolen?
Thank you, Sheriff.
Where's the evidence the election was stolen, sir?
For all honest people, you can see it. For people who are operating under a kind of democratic brainwashing and fraud, you refuse to see it.
It's the crime of the century, as it's been called. Where's the evidence?
The evidence is abundant. It's a tremendous amount of evidence. Let's get started.
Do you believe you'll be acquitted, sir?
I believe the case will be dismissed as unconstitutional. This is a complete misuse of the criminal process to interfere with the 2024 election.
There you heard it. He thinks he'll be acquitted. What comes next are trials tentatively scheduled for October, likely will be pushed back into next year, 2025. In the meantime, we have a list of 14 potential witnesses. At the top of the list is our former governor, Doug Ducey, who you'll recall got that phone call on November 30th, 2020, as he was certifying the election. Phone in his pocket rang. The ringtone was hailed to the chief. It was Donald Trump on the line with a last-ditch attempt to stop the certification.
last attempt to try to stop the certification, and we can't say it enough. There was no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. Great reporting, Brahm Resnik, for us. I appreciate you coming on with your exclusive reporting.
Thanks so much.
And I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.